wiped out most of the dinosaurs. And then we see radiation after that of mammals. We're right in the midst of a radiation right now that's been going on for probably 300 million years of insects. Every time we look for insects, we find ones that we didn't know were out there. And if we look at the records and the history that we have of the insect world, they seem to be radiating out. They seem to be getting speciating more and more rapidly and rapidly. How are we doing time? We got plenty of time. Great, because I got a lot to say.
Okay, let me jump in here real quick. Richard mentioned also the concept of information, and he talked about how evolution can't explain new information or an increase in information. And one of the examples that he pointed to was the breeding of a Chihuahua from a Great Dane, which I don't know for sure if that's an actual progression. Any dog to a Chihuahua, equally well. And there seems to be the implication there that the Chihuahua is obviously less information. The information required for a Chihuahua to emerge is less than what was there before. And information theory is way too complicated for us to immediately jump into here. People make careers and post-PhD work out of information theory, and it's not always obvious what constitutes more information or less. But really quickly, I just want to say that a smaller organism is certainly not automatically less complex. And not only can you look at, in the breeding of Chihuahuas, not only can you look at the disappearance of traits in the breeds that it was bred from or emerged from, but you also see the emergence of new traits. You can't simply describe a Chihuahua as this breed of dog minus these traits. You can't describe it that way. So in addition to removing some traits, the breeding process has added other traits. And so it seems to me bizarre for him to just automatically say, well, we bred these into Chihuahuas, and clearly that's less information. Like, on what grounds is that less information?
Okay. I wanted to mention a little bit about the evolution of feathers. The idea that Archaeopteryx was all bird is a common theory on one side of the argument. There's another side of the argument that says Archaeopteryx was all dinosaur. And then there are people who recognize that you can clearly see from looking at Archaeopteryx that it is a dinosaur that also has a lot of bird-like features, including the feathers. And the idea that feathers emerged or evolved completely in one fell swoop is actually fallacious. We have fossils of different types of feathers, feather types that don't even seem to exist anymore. And you also have to realize that we're not even talking about something that developed with Archaeopteryx, but something that developed actually millions of years before that. A lot of people think that even the tyrannosaurs had feathers. Most of the theropod dinosaurs probably had feathers. And not feathers like you see on a bird either, but a different type of feather. You have anything?
Yeah.
Okay. I like the quote, and I don't know where you got this, I'd like to see the numbers, that mutations harm 1,000 times more than they help. I'm okay with that. I don't know that that's the right ratio, but it does say that mutations do help more than zero. I mean, if you're talking about mutations are overwhelmingly neutral. That's the first thing. But the ones that are not neutral, most of them are not beneficial to the species that they happen. But that is also based upon the environment that species is living in. If any of you were here last time, remember I talked about the bacterium that mutated from being able to digest sugar to being able to digest nylon. Would have basically ended that bacteria's line at the get-go if there was no nylon around. So the idea of what's a beneficial versus what's a harmful mutation is not exactly clear cut. Let's see.
We've got about 30 seconds left here, I believe. A couple of points that I want to make really quickly. We heard them repeat some things we addressed in the last debate 2 months ago. I won't go into detail again, but I will remind people that we said in the last event that it's often a debate about semantics, or not even semantics, but misunderstandings. When we hear them say things like, evolution can't explain this, or this about evolution doesn't make sense, they're often right in one sense and wrong in another. They're right in the sense that that doesn't make sense. They're wrong in the sense that that's not what evolution says. So when they say things like, comes about by random chance, or when they say things like, can't explain the origin of life, they keep repeating that evolution ought to explain the origin of life, when it's in fact explicitly not a part of the process. The situations like that, evolution describes what happens once you have imperfect replicators in place. Where those replicators came from, evolution makes no claim. There are a lot of different thoughts, there are a lot of different ideas, but evolution really does make no claim whatsoever on where the replicators came from. All it says is, once we have imperfect replicators in place, and then we have changing environments and different pressures that are exerted on those imperfect replicators, what happens over time? And what happens is exactly what we've been able to observe.
And I actually want to say one more thing, I'll be quick. John started out by saying that he was going to be making some declarations that were going to be offensive to us, and I just want to clarify, we can't be offended by your theories. We're not married to ours in the same way that you are to yours. If you show us the evidence that's contrary to everything that we understand, we will change our minds. We can't be offended by ideas.
Age. If the time isn't there, evolution can't be. That's impossible. Let's take a look at carbon-14. Many people get intimidated by it. They get confused by some of the terms, but it really isn't that confusing. And if I can get a slide on board. It's not really all that confusing. Let's look at the basics. What is an atom? An atom is the basic building block of matter. It is a nucleus made up of protons and neutrons around which circle electrons. Atoms are sometimes, for different reasons, referred to as isotopes. They can either be stable or unstable. Carbon always has 6 protons. That's its atomic number. Add the number of neutrons and you have atomic mass. An element is considered stable if it has an equal number of protons and neutrons. Therefore, oxygen will have 8 protons and 8 neutrons. Nitrogen has 7 and 7. Carbon has 6 and 6. A carbon atom with 6 protons and 8 neutrons is unstable. That's how we get carbon-14. The life cycle of carbon begins with a nitrogen atom. The nitrogen atom is struck by cosmic rays. It loses a proton. That makes it a carbon atom. It makes it carbon-14. Carbon-14 decays back into nitrogen-14 and the cycle starts all over again. But what happens is the nitrogen gets hit with cosmic radiation, back up, gets hit with cosmic radiation. It becomes carbon-14. Carbon-14 mixes with oxygen and we get CO2. CO2 breaks back down into nitrogen-14. Plants and animals, animals eat plants. Humans eat plants and animals. And we take in carbon-14. And here we come to the critical assumption. Now watch that word assume. How do we date a fossil with C14? We assume the ratio of C12 to C14 has been constant since the beginning of life on planet Earth. Remember that theory of uniformitarianism I told you about? Nothing has changed. Everything is the same. If we assume the amount of carbon-14 in a fossil when it died, and we assume that the ratio of carbon-14 to carbon-12, a stable element, has always been the same, and we assume that no carbon has washed in or washed out, we might be able to come close to estimating the age of the fossil. The chart tells us the information necessary to give a proper estimate. The current rate of C12 to C14 in the atmosphere is 1 trillion to 1. Therefore, if we find 100 C14 atoms, the fossil died less than 5,730 years ago, because 5,730